I used to visit my great uncle Jack maybe several times a year where he lived at his retirement center in Richmond, Virginia. Whenever I visited, I would ask him about his career working for AT&T Long Lines. He worked on the construction of undersea telephone cables, so I saw him as a pioneer in global communications that eventually grew into the modern internet. I found his stories fascinating. However, for some reason, he was always quite short or brushed off the stories about building phone lines as a boring subject, as if there was nothing notable to talk about. Then, one visit in late 2018, I did the usual asking him about long lines, and he said to me he did not like his job as he always feared assassination. It was at that moment that he decided to tell me his life story as a secret agent. I started visiting him almost twice a week for about a year, and he asked that I record our conversations. When I told my mother about Jack telling me about his life story as a secret agent, she told me a story from a long ways back. Jack and his wife were visiting my parents, and Jack inadvertently said his wife also worked on top secret projects. This was already known that she worked on maps of Japan for LeMay, but this was the first time my parents were to learn that Jack also worked on top secret projects. He said he worked on what he called the Red Line. This is also known as the Washington Moscow Hotline. We did not understand what this meant until now. We also understood that his wife, Marion, traveled with him while he worked. After sorting through all of the recordings and researching the time and places he mentioned, it became evident that he was a significant inspiration for the creation of Ian Fleming's James Bond. Jack carried many of the characteristics of the originally conceived James Bond character. First, his name was James, of course, but he also had blue-gray eyes, he loved scrambled eggs, he was a dull man, and he was a bird lover. Ian Fleming said James Bond had a comma-shaped bit of hair that came down above his right eye. Lastly, 007 came from the catalog number assigned to the Zimmerman telegram. The Zimmerman telegram was a telegram sent between Mexico and Germany during World War I, where Germany attempted to entice Mexico into attacking the United States. The Zimmerman telegram is credited for being the catalyst for bringing the United States into World War I. Jack's mission was the embodiment of 007. This video details his childhood through his completion of his 007 mission.
The idea that a guy like me was in on so many of those things. I don't know. It's not logical or likely, but it happened. That's where I was born, Richmond, Virginia.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember where my mother, I think my mother's from Buckingham too. My Uncle Charlie, that had a player piano, lived maybe a half a mile from us. Have you ever met my father?
No, sir.
I'll tell you, my father is one of the nicest men that ever lived. I think my mother and father both lost their jobs. How old was I? Well, when they first hit, I was 9. They might have to start drinking half portions of milk. Do you still have food stamps? Don't have one. Okay. Of course, I haven't seen one for a long time. I was 11 when my mother and father split up.
When Jack's parents first divorced, Jack and his mother moved into a hotel room with another family.
And of course, one of my ambitions, or one of my goals was to get my mother and father back together again. And that's been one of my goals, or my main goal. I want all of you to be happy. I want to be happy too. I want to be happy, but I won't be happy till I make you happy too. You probably never heard that song before. Well, that's from my day. I want to be happy, but I won't be happy till I make you happy too. Bum 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 bum. Bum 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 bum. You know, after my father and mother were divorced, he and his mother, my grandmother, they lived in the same apartment with us. They used the dining room as a bedroom. I just want everybody to be happy.
Jack spoke at length about his Uncle Will. I believe Will served somewhat as a father figure for him. Will was mentally disabled.
A perfectly nice man. You might or might not like him when you first met him, particularly knowing what I'm telling you now. But actually, he's a very nice man. He was always nice to me when I was a child, and so that either he couldn't march, or he couldn't shoot, or something. But I'm not a bit ashamed of him. You might think that he was somebody to be ashamed of. But if you knew the inside story, there was nothing shameful about it. At least in my opinion. I went through all the schools, starting with kindergarten and Stonewall Jackson and Fox School and Thomas Jefferson High School.
In high school, his ambition was to become a journalist, and he was the front page editor of the high school newspaper. In 1938, after Jack graduated high school, he spent a summer in boot camp at Fort Belvoir. I believe this is likely was part of a requirement that helped pay for his college education.
I spent several weeks during one summer vacation at Fort Belvoir in Northern Virginia. And I don't remember much about that. We lived in tents. I think we had wooden floors about 6 inches off of the mud or something. And that's about all I can remember.
Jack went on to Virginia Polytech Institute through the ROTC program, and he obtained a degree in electrical engineering and joined the American Institute of Electrical Engineers. Here is one of the notes from one of his classmates. "Without a doubt, you are the slowest moving man I've ever seen, and yet no one could say you didn't get things accomplished."
I graduated with a creditable score. But see, at the time I graduated from BPI, which was June 41, we were not in the war.
Before he graduated, he wrote his dad asking for money as he was flat broke and wanted to attend the Regional American Institute of Electrical Engineers Convention in Birmingham. However, he realized he was to be paid $20 on April 1 for his ROTC stipend, and this would be enough to pay for his way to the convention. He writes, "P.P.S. I have got an envelope for my letter to AT&T and will probably send that off tonight. Also, I remember that there is going to be a trip to Birmingham, Alabama, to the regional meeting of the American Institute of Electrical Engineers on, I think, April 4 or somewhere around that date. M.M. Bush was the head of his chapter of the American Institute of Electrical Engineers. I suspect he was part of one of the two powerful Bush families. At the time, Vannevar Bush was appointed the first presidential science advisor and was asked to prepare scientists for warfare. The other well-known Bush family later was heavily influential with the CIA. This event would have been a perfect recruiting opportunity for the British Security Coordination to find prospective recruits. The British Security Coordination recruited Americans in an effort to help protect British interests in the Americans and to influence American policy for help in fighting Germany. When prospective American recruits asked what the job may entail working for the British Security Coordination, they were told most details could not be revealed except that murder was a part of the job. It was a license to kill, if you will. I believe this event is where Jack was recruited into British intelligence, and as later he describes working for them as early as the next month in May 1941. This image from Jack's retirement book comments about how Jack obtained 2 job offers upon graduation. We only knew of the AT&T job offer up until now.
And
Don't you think I'm the least probable secret agent of any you've ever met? Did you know that I am one of the original bombs? I probably had the biggest bomb record in the service. I knew a lot of secrets that people senior to me knew, and I was one of the younger ones. Well, it's not a fun job when you're doing it. You're lucky if you don't get assassinated. But you're also, in a sense, you're lucky that you're in on things. But they're really, see, for a young man, that's thrilling. But for an older man like me, or even you, I think it was because of having an association with the British intelligence.
you had an association with the British intelligence?
Yeah. You know, the whole idea, well, not the whole idea, but a large part of the philosophy of that is nobody knows, nobody is told anything that he doesn't need to know. So, certain things, if you did need to know, okay. But related things that would have helped you to have a larger overall picture, you didn't get told because it wasn't the idea that you should know all of that. Actually, I think it's generally believed that Americans did not make as good secret agents as most of the international people did.
Well,
Now, that's my opinion, and I may be wrong about that, but that's the way I felt about it. I don't know whether I did well or not. I worked up there. I had never even come up before. I worked up there in a local telephone office. I think it was on 50th Street. I'm trying to remember the name of one place. It was a man's name, you know. Like Smith. Wasn't Smith, of course. At the moment, I can't even remember. Used to be that some of those offices were up there in the East 50s. But that was years ago, and I don't know whether they, for the most part, these are totally underground, the people work there, but they have a cover story. And one of the cover stories is that they worked for a Chicago newspaper.
Yes.
One of the things of that type.
Jack is describing the Rockefeller Center, which was the location for the British Security Coordination, and on October 1, 1941, also became the first office of the CIA, known at that time as the Office of the Coordinator of Information. He was describing how there were many secret agents working out of this building, and interestingly, one of the secret agents worked for a Chicago newspaper. I do not know if there is a connection. However, after the Battle of Midway, the Chicago Tribune published articles suggesting that Pearl Harbor was a setup, since American forces must have already known the Japanese codes in order to win at the Battle of Midway. Roosevelt accused the Chicago Tribune of treason.
I think the Russians had an office up there on the east side. Oh, but I'm not sure. That's what I think. I might be wrong.
I believe the building Jack thought was controlled by Russians is a building owned by Vincent Astor. Vincent Astor had a building on 62nd Street where friends that were known as the Club would meet. This was more or less older men that dabbled in espionage. The location was called The Room. As Jack wasn't given access, his only guess was that this building must have been controlled by Russians.
Well, when I first went to Washington and stumbled into that place on, I guess it was on 15th Street, only about 2 or 3 doors from from the cross street, I know at the time it struck me as very strange that that building had a telephone office in it, because otherwise it was not a business location at all. I mean, it was not. When I first went to Washington, and they had one of those safe house kind of a places that were over there near 14th Street on Columbia Road or something like that. Old telephone building, which became Washington 2 early in the war, so that there would be an alternative way to call into the Washington area.
While Jack described the main buildings he worked in and around, it was in the office of the British Security Coordination at the Rockefeller Center that he worked decoding intercepted Nazi communications. Jack said he was a bomba. Bomba, B-O-M-B-A, is a Polish word for a machine that is built specifically for decoding encrypted messages.
Bomba. Bomba. I'm a bomba.
In May 1941, a new Nazi communication network was established in South America. It was called the Lermax Network, or the Pi Circuit, for using the numbers of pi in a Gronsfeld cipher to encode communications. Among many messages, this network requested permission from Germany to set up sabotage efforts against Allied shipping out of South America. Bombs were to be placed on the hulls of ships and set to go off when the ship was far out to sea. These activities certainly caught the attention of Ian Fleming, who worked for Britain's Naval Intelligence Division. These decoded messages were essentially a reliving of the Zimmerman telegram. As I mentioned before, the Zimmerman telegram was what brought the United States into World War I. It is also the origination of 007. Given that he memorized the first 30 digits of pi when he was in high school, Jack could have been in a serendipitous position to recognize this brand new encryption message before any of his other peers. Jack had said before that he memorized the 30 digits of pi so that he would not have to carry around his slide scale everywhere in school. The number pi.
Oh, well, but so what? I mean, that's just a trick. That's
Sure.
3.141592653588979. That's as far as I remember now. I used to remember several more places. Well, of course, if the president wanted something, he didn't know that it was never done before. And generally speaking, we got it done. But not necessarily, not always. One time I worked in the West Wing, and one time I worked in the basement of the East Wing. I don't remember that I did a whole lot. They had a representative there from England, I think it was, and he was the one that they really wanted to talk to or discuss with. I remember one time when I worked in the basement of the White House, and we were working with somebody in Hawaii, and they were working with somebody in farther to the west.
Tokyo?
Huh?
Tokyo, maybe?
Say the place again.
Japan.
Japan. I don't know. I mean, I don't remember. I remember being in the basement of the White House. I think it was 2 separate occasions. One was when the British made use of that link. And the other one, I don't remember any particulars.
Ian Fleming and Admiral Godfrey had visited President Roosevelt on May 28, 1941. I suspect the visit was to inform President Roosevelt of the newly decoded Nazi messages. President Roosevelt had claimed that he had been shown maps where South America had been divided up into vassals of Nazi Germany. It is also suspected that it was this meeting that persuaded President Roosevelt to create the Office of the Coordinator of Information, the predecessor to the CIA. Jack emphasized that he knew specifically that at one moment there were only British men in the White House code room. They were calling someone west of Tokyo, someone that was very interested in speaking with the British intelligence officers. If this was the visit that Ian Fleming took on May 28, 1941, then no time was wasted sending Jack on a mission across the Soviet Union to enter Japan, flying from Vladivostok.
I remember going to Russia. Would the communists accept me as a foreign relations? I don't know.
How many times have you been to Moscow?
I don't know.
You don't know. More than once?
I think so.
You think so? For work.
For work?
For work.
That's a different proposition. I mean, I met with some people in Stockholm, and part of the people came from Russia. And we met them in Stockholm. And the particular meeting I'm talking about was in Stockholm, but didn't have any great significance. Well, I was in Helsinki, and from Helsinki you could take a Asiatic train that went all the way to Vladivostok. Ain't that something? It went across the lower part of Siberia. Not very far from the Chinese border. It seems to me that there was one thing that involved the Trans-Siberian Railroad, which you know about, I'm sure. You know it exists. But I do remember some odds and ends of incidents on the way from European Russia to the Pacific Ocean. It's a mighty rough road from Lynchburg to Danville, with something on a 3-mile grade. It was on that grade that he lost his average, and you know what a jump he made. Casey Jones, he mounted to the cabin. Casey Jones, his orders in his hand. Casey Jones, he mounted to the cabin, made the farewell trip into the promised land. Come all you rounders if you want to hear the story of a brave engineer. Casey Jones was his rounder's name on a 6-8 wheeler that he found his fame. Casey Jones, he mounted to the cabin. Casey Jones, his orders in his hand. Casey Jones, he mounted to the cabin, took his farewell trip into the promised land. You know, as you go across Siberia, there are probably 3 or 4, I'm just guessing, intermediate stations, intermediate places where either there were repeaters.
The following is Jack describing the Soviets taking him to what was the Battle of Khalkin Gol. The Battle of Khalkin Gol occurred in 1939, and it was a border war between Japan and the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union won this battle, and a truce was established. There were many tanks and vehicles amongst the carnage that was left behind. Jack got off the train and went closer to where the battle occurred. However, the Soviets seemed to have pulled him back in fear that he may perhaps be shot by a stray sniper.
Oh, they used part of the Great Wall of China. They did. As part of that, you could see all kinds of little bits and pieces, wreckage. Sometimes, from a distance, you thought you were seeing a complete piece. But when you got closer, you saw that there were little gaps. I mean, if you saw a piece that seemed to be 5 miles long, maybe there was one piece 1 mile long, and the other little pieces were scattered around, you know. I was close to the border with China. I saw people died, but they brought me back. Maybe they thought I was important. I don't know. I think I remember going to Tokyo. I think that was in June, I believe, 1941. And I had gotten there, I think, by some kind of a special agreement that I would be permitted to investigate. But that's about all I can remember. And was I young and innocent and didn't know what the score was? Boy, you may think I don't know what the score is now. But boy, there was.
You didn't know.
But you see, they just They looked down the list of people and they said, "Hey, you're gonna do so and so." And what do? You got paid every payday. I flew over Tokyo before it was bombed. It was beautiful. It was wonderful. But most of the good stuff was laid waste. It was our fault. It was such a terrible waste. All those beautiful, wonderful buildings, Tokyo was a wonderful city. But of course we couldn't let it. We couldn't help it. I guess it was a sight that everybody in the world would have liked to see. And I was one of the few that did. You know, they had a lot of their streets had the same names as our streets. I mean, like Fifth Avenue and things like that. They copied us, of course. That's a shame. Peace would be so much better. I mean, suppose the Japanese could turn all of their efforts into useful purposes. It's wonderful. But that's why we have wars. Oh, war is the greatest waste. It's just terrible. The idea of our devoting so much effort to bad causes. Oh, me. My generation should have had sense enough to get rid of war. Ours a no, no go. What did I do in Vladivostok? I don't know. I got on a train there and rode it all the way into Europe. By the way, a couple of things that I mentioned to you. You need to have your throat cut. Oh, no, I'm kidding. I wouldn't tell you anything that you had to have your throat cut for.
Jack's mission was aborted, and he headed home, where he started working for AT&T on June 23, 1941, the day after Hitler invaded the Soviet Union. His first job at AT&T was working on crosstalk balancing in Pennsylvania.
I know 32 6th Avenue has been there ever since I started to work for online.
Yes.
And I think the first time I went there was when I spent a week learning about the Long Lines organization. And they assigned me to what we called crosstalk balancing. And I'll explain crosstalk balancing
Okay.
in great detail if you want to know, but
I would love to know, Jack.
You don't want to know.
Yeah, I'd love to know.
Well, in each K-carrier amplifier station, they had a bank of crosstalk balancing coils. K-carrier was the first of what we call broadband carriers. Crosstalk is from one circuit into another circuit. We had these things called crosstalk balancing coils. And so the idea was you minimized the crosstalk from pair 1 to pair 41, and so on and so on. Basically, it was simple. I mean, just having things arranged so that you minimize crosstalk from one particular circuit into another one, or into a whole bunch of other ones, etc., etc.
In late September 1941, Jack was being sent back to Tokyo. At this time, Hitler was pressing close to Moscow, invading the Soviet Union, and Jack would not be able to get on a train in Helsinki. Instead, he said they dumped him out northwest of Moscow. He was parachuted in and then took the Siberian Rail the rest of the way to Vladivostok, and then flown into Tokyo early October 1941.
Okay.
But I do remember when we made the call around the world. Yeah, called Hawaii from east and west, I believe. And that's when they connected it at Hawaii. It means we were going around the world.
Jack had said that the only way the men in Hawaii knew that the phone call went all the way around the world was that the phone rang on the other side of the room after they dialed. The room in Hawaii must have been Rockefeller's dungeon. Rockefeller's dungeon was the Pacific Navy intelligence hub. We got through Europe, Eastern Europe, Russia, Siberia, China, across the Pacific, Japan, the Philippines, Hawaii, and once you got to Hawaii, then you were in the American network. And of course, when you get to the East Coast of the United States, you're also in the European network. It's quite possible that the circuit between Washington and Moscow might possibly have been by way of one of the Scandinavian countries. But you know, that was about the longest overland connection we ever had. From Moscow or wherever they picked up that circuit, that if Russia hadn't gotten in on it, it wouldn't have happened. Yeah, we might have gone through some of those European countries without permission or something. Well, in those days, you did what you had to do. Yeah. You didn't do what was convenient or in the book or anything of that kind. The phone call had been smuggled through Japan and Nazi Europe using fake companies set up by Soviet agents. In Europe, it may have been the Cymex company, which was set up by communist spies in France. To go through Japan, Soviet agents in Tokyo had set up companies as their cover. Jack had described one man in Tokyo that was capable of repairing cars. The radio man for the Soviet spies in Tokyo was Max Clausen. Max Clausen was the man that set up fake companies for cover for the Soviet agents, and he also did repair cars in Tokyo.
I don't think I ever worked for any branch of the government unless it was indirectly, in that I worked for some other fictitious organization, which in turn was, oh boy, there are little bits and pieces that I remember clearly. Well, remember, I was one of the lower level people. I mean, I had a few people reporting to me in my branch of the organization. But that's all I ever knew. Well, of course, it was in Russian characters, you know. So, I mean, you go to Moscow today and you'll see some of those old signs in those old Russian characters. And I can't tell you any more than that. What I remember is that there was a connection between 32 6th Avenue and some office in Manhattan, which went from there to some office, not a telephone office, but maybe some office that maybe the Russians or somebody had in Manhattan. I don't think any such call was ever made, except maybe a few, I don't know. And of course, all of us who were involved in aspects of that had to be have proper clearance, top secret clearance. I think they considered me a major participant in providing the round-the-world service. You can say that. You're probably right. It was a worldwide system.
The best I could understand was that the call occurred early in the month of October and perhaps early in the week as well. October 6th, 1941 was a Monday. On October 7th, 1941, Stalin granted his nation freedom of religion. On October 8th, 1941, President Roosevelt gave the Soviet Union a $1 billion loan in the form of weapons to assist the Soviet Union in its fight against Hitler. I can only imagine that if Roosevelt publicly gave Stalin an ultimatum for freedom of religion, it could have been turned down by Stalin, as it would have made Stalin look weak. At the same time, the American people would not have approved President Roosevelt supporting a regime that persecuted people based on their religion. Given the timing, Roosevelt likely came to this agreement over the phone with Stalin. This was a major entry for the United States into supporting the war effort against Hitler. The following is Jack describing being arrested. When he was arrested, he said there was a man, perhaps a Soviet Polish man, that called him a bum.
I remember the occasion, but not what day of the month. When I was arrested in Tokyo, that's just because They thought I was a Russian or something. I think I was on the street in Tokyo. I think it was October. I don't think there was anybody else with me. All I know is it seemed like I was in Tokyo and everything was going as you would expect. But it turned out that it wasn't. Now, I don't know what the explanation is. I don't think we saw anything different. I don't understand it. I don't know what else to say without getting into the bad stuff. But I may have said a few words that didn't fit. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I wish I never heard of any of it. Of course, once you've heard of it, you can't help it. I mean, then you know something that you shouldn't know. This whole secret business is a terrible. Help me, help me. The Japs won't tell me anything.
Where in the world?
They've almost killed me. As far as I know, that's what they've done. They've got that thing in me and kept on hitting me over and over. But I don't think that matters. If I live for a day or two after that, I'll probably be all right. Well, they hit me on my tender shrub spot, and then they shoved down on my ribs. But it could be worse. I mean, after all, I could be unconscious. I don't know, compared to any other distraction or anything else. What are you gonna do? All you can do is say it. Where they just punch through and kick through and do things that they try to avoid in a normal and think, they build you up and then try to see whether they can get you beyond living. You mean because I had been a prisoner? Yeah. Well, I mean, they did me the honors that they would have done for a foreign officer, which was me.
Other than the waterboarding torture, Jack had said they treated him well in prison. I believe they would have kept him at Sugamo prison. He also described seeing the Doolittle Raid from the prison. He first thought they were DC-3s, but then realized they were American bombers.
Was I working in Tokyo? No. One of the bombs would surely have found me. I've spent an awful lot of time watching the American planes flying over Tokyo, and if I had the wings of an angel over these prison walls, I would fly. I would fly to the arms of my darling, and there I'd be willing to die.
While Jack was in prison, his parents were told they could contact Jack by writing to the Stratford Hotel in Fredericksburg, Virginia. You can see in this letter from his mother on his birthday that she has cryptically underlined the words, "will return." Jack was arrested at almost the same time as Richard Zorg. It has been suggested that Richard Zorg was the most successful spy of all time. Ian Fleming said he was the most formidable spy in history. Richard Zorg was in charge of the Soviet spy ring in Tokyo. He had warned Stalin of Hitler's plan to attack in June, and it is said that Richard Zorg also notified Stalin that Japan would not attack Siberia, but instead focus their attack southward, including the American Philippines. Richard Zorg agreed to write his memoir while in the Japanese prison. Currently, only the CIA has his memoir files, and there are only two versions available. They are the English and the Japanese translation. There's a small difference between these two translations, and that is the portion of the memoir describing a man of which Jack's description fits. This mysterious man mentioned in the English translation was deleted from the Japanese translation, and throughout history, no one has ever been able to identify this man. His memoir reads as follows. I believe that two different couriers came to the meetings in Tokyo, a strong-looking young man and a still younger, slightly built courier. However, I was unable to identify the picture shown me by the police officer in the last examination as the tall, strong man. The man I met did not wear glasses. Despite multiple requests for diplomatic exchanges to Stalin to free Richard Zorg, Stalin refused, and Richard Zorg was executed in 1944. The following is Jack describing how he understood the Soviets to treat their own spies.
For one thing, they took all of that much more seriously than we did. I mean, but I don't mean that we didn't take it seriously, but they were, if somebody did something serious that contradicted their viewpoint, they lost his head. I mean, They may have had an exchange of prisoners, some such thing as that. I don't think anybody's ever brought that subject up before. It never got any publicity. I hope the Americans rescued me, repatriate me. I think what they did, they took me to one of the Aleutian Islands where the Americans had an outpost, and they took me in. I think they took a bunch of us to Tokyo, from Japan to one of the Aleutian Islands, which had been designated as an exchange point. And so we met the Americans there, and they took us over and took us back to Alaska and then to California. I think there were one or maybe two. I know when I came back and I stayed for a few days on one of those Aleutian Islands where the sort of a more or less government. Well, we just had, 3 or 4 of us. And I suppose I remember one particular man who was, seemed to be a sort of a head of delegation or something. I don't know. We stopped somewhere on the Aleutian Islands. I was nearly dead at the time, but they fixed me up. I want to go there again. It was so nice. Girls were so pretty. They must have fixed me up. Somewhere coming down from Alaska, we stopped somewhere, but I don't remember the name of the place. Such nice people. Such nice people. Very nice.
When he got back to Washington, D.C., he was assigned to work in emergency utility communications. I believe this was the beginning of continuity of governance efforts, also known as the shadow government. In 1945, he was drafted to serve in the Signal Corps. He was sent to Paris to operate the Paris vocoder, also known as the Sig Sally. The men selected for this task were the most intelligent men in the armed forces. In this image, in 1950, he is teaching encryption to Air Force officers regarding an encrypting device produced out of the Bell Labs cybernetics department. I believe this may be the birth of what is called the football that follows around the president. He had said that he was responsible for connecting the president by telephone anytime the president traveled. This is a picture of a co-worker when they completed the construction of the Garden City Communications Tower. This was an important communications tower coming out of Washington, D.C. The following set of pictures are for a party that Jack attended as he worked for the United Nations Subcommittee for Telecommunication. This party was to celebrate the global adoption of the Signal System 6. This was the first system that would allow for inter-computer communications. There are stories about spies that were capable of planting difficult-to-achieve wiretaps, and they traveled the world under the cover of working for this telecommunications committee. These spies were dubbed Mission Impossible spies. This final clip is Jack describing Ian Fleming visiting him. Later, Jack corrected himself and said that this British secret agent visited Jack at his house in Armonk, New York. Ian Fleming was interviewed by the New Yorker in April 1962, and this is what Ian Fleming said to the journalist. "I'm here to see my publishers and assorted crooks," he said. "Not other assorted crooks, mind you. By crooks, I don't mean crooks at all. I mean former Secret Service men. There are one or two of them here, you know." "Who?" the journalist asked. "Oh, men like the boss of James Bond, the operative who's the chief character in all my books." At this time of Ian Fleming's visit, Jack was working in New York City.
Women are fine. Women are funny, especially English women.
Do you know the name of the British man that came to live with you for 2 days in Arlington? Do you remember his name?
Do I know the name of the man that stayed with us for 2 days in Arlington?
Yes.
No, I know that he was a member of the British Secret Service. And he was interested in where we lived and how we lived and all. And that was when we lived on that corner lot that where the road turned.
Yeah. So he was interested in you.
Huh?
So he came to visit you because he wanted to learn about you?
I'm not really sure. I'm not sure what he came here for.
Okay.
He was a nice guy. He was interested in the job, of course.
Lastly, Jack was in the White House during the Cuban Missile Crisis. John F. Kennedy had said during this crisis he had hoped that James Bond was on his side. I think that is tongue-in-cheek, and John F. Kennedy, a huge Bond fan, knew the real James Bond was on his side. Later, when Kennedy was assassinated, Jack was called to the White House urgently. He said the administration was working to stop Curtis LeMay from taking over as number 2.
It's a grand old flag. It's a high flag, and forever in peace does it wave. It's the emblem of the land I love, the home of the peace land, the great brave. Every heart beats true to the red, white, and blue, and they never oppose